Welcome to Mystery Cafe, your ultimate stop for gripping detective stories, chilling mysteries, and unforgettable investigations. Here, every video serves a fresh dose of suspense, shocking twists, and cases that challenge your inner detective. From classic whodunits to modern crime stories, we bring the world of mystery straight to your screen, where every clue matters and no secret stays buried for long. Before we start unraveling today's mystery, we'd love to know, where are you watching from? Globe showing Europe, Africa. Drop your country, city, or stay in the comments, and let's see how far the Mystery Cafe family reaches. Magnifying glass tilted right.
The Secret Beneath the Cobblestones. Chapter 1. The Midnight Caller. The moon hung low over the sleepy town of Cabot Cove, casting a silvery glow on the cobblestone streets. A gentle breeze rustled through the trees, carrying with it the scent of salt from the nearby ocean. Inside her cozy cottage, Jessica Fletcher sat at her desk, the soft light of a single lamp illuminating the pages of her latest manuscript. She had just typed the final words of her latest mystery novel, a tale of betrayal and deceit set against the backdrop of an old estate in the English countryside. Jessica stretched her stiff fingers and let out a contented sigh. It had been a productive evening, and the quiet peace of the night was a welcome reprieve from the hustle of her often unpredictable life. As she prepared to turn in for the night, her phone rang, breaking the tranquility. It was an unusual hour for anyone to be calling her, especially for someone in Cabot Cove, where the pace of life was often slow and predictable. Jessica hesitated for a moment, her fingers brushing over the receiver before she picked up. "Hello?" she said, her voice calm yet curious. A sharp breath came over the line, followed by a hesitant voice. "Mrs. Fletcher?" The voice trembled. I need your help." Jessica straightened in her chair, immediately sensing the urgency in the caller's tone. "Who is this?" "My name is Thomas Westbrook," the man replied quickly, his words coming in short bursts. "I'm a historian, specializing in local history. His voice cracked as if trying to suppress a rising panic. "I think someone's trying to kill me." Jessica's mind immediately shifted into investigative mode. A historian in trouble? This was no ordinary late-night phone call. "Mr. Westbrook, calm down. Where are you? What's going on?" "I'm staying at the Cabot Cove Inn," Thomas said, his voice still shaky. "I've been researching the old Cobblestone Estate on the outskirts of town, but I've uncovered something someone doesn't want me to find." "The Cobblestone Estate?" Jessica's brow furrowed. "That's a historic property. Tell me, what exactly have you found there?" "Letters, journals, old maps," Thomas continued, his voice becoming more frantic. "I've traced several locations on the estate grounds, and I'm certain there's a hidden cellar, a room where something valuable was kept during the Civil War. I think it's a treasure. But someone doesn't want me digging any further." Jessica paused, processing his words. The Cobblestone Estate had always been a point of local interest, but its past was shrouded in mystery, with few details about its original owners and their history. "And now you're being threatened?" "Yes," Thomas confirmed, his voice barely a whisper. "I've received several anonymous notes. The last one said..." He hesitated. "It said, 'Stop or you'll be the next to disappear.' Mrs. Fletcher, I don't know who to trust. I'm scared." Jessica's mind raced. Threatening letters, hidden treasure, and an old estate steeped in history. It sounded like a recipe for danger, and for someone like Jessica Fletcher, who had solved countless mysteries in the past, it also sounded like a challenge. "I'll meet you tomorrow morning, Mr. Westbrook," she said, her voice firm. "Tell me where you are, and we'll figure this out together." The phone call ended abruptly, leaving Jessica alone with her thoughts. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to form, but she couldn't help but feel that there was more to this story than Thomas had let on. What was it that he had uncovered in his research? And who was so desperate to stop him? The next morning, Jessica made her way to the Cabot Cove Inn. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a warm golden hue over the town's quiet streets. The air was fresh and crisp, and Jessica could hear the distant call of seagulls as she walked toward the inn. Her mind was still on the conversation she'd had the previous night, and she couldn't shake the feeling that this would be no ordinary case. Inside the inn, the front desk clerk greeted Jessica with a smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Fletcher. You're here to see Mr. Westbrook, right?" "That's right," Jessica said, smiling in return. "Is he still here?" The clerk nodded. "He's in the back corner by the window. He's been waiting for you." Jessica thanked her and made her way to the back of the lobby. She found Thomas sitting at a small table by the window, his face pale and drawn. He looked up as she approached, his eyes filled with a mix of relief and worry. "Mrs. Fletcher," Thomas greeted her with a weak smile, standing to shake her hand. "Thank you for coming. I'm not sure what to do anymore." "Sit down, Mr. Westbrook," Jessica said gently, guiding him back to his chair. "Tell me everything. Start from the beginning." Thomas took a deep breath, collecting his thoughts before speaking. "I've been researching the Cobblestone Estate for the last several months. The estate was once owned by the Vance family, a prominent local family who were very wealthy before the Civil War, but after the war they disappeared, vanished without a trace. There were rumors that they were involved in some sort of illicit trade, but nothing concrete." Jessica leaned forward, intrigued. "And you think they hid something at the estate?" Thomas nodded. "I came across a series of letters from a woman named Evelyn Vance, the daughter of the estate's owner. In one letter, she mentions a hidden room in the cellar, a place where her father stored something precious. She referred to it as the key to their future. But after she wrote that letter, there were no more letters. It's as if they just disappeared." "And now you're looking for this hidden room?" Jessica asked, her mind racing with possibilities. Thomas nodded again. "I've narrowed down the location of the cellar based on the old maps and journals I've found, but the closer I get, the more I feel like someone's watching me. I've received threats. Someone wants me to stop." Jessica's instincts told her that this was no ordinary case of historical research gone awry. There was something more at play here, a secret buried beneath the cobblestones, one that someone was willing to kill to protect. "I'll help you," Jessica said, her voice resolute. "We'll go to the Cobblestone Estate together. But you need to be careful. Whoever is behind this won't hesitate to do whatever it takes to keep that secret buried." Thomas's eyes widened, relief washing over him. "Thank you, Mrs. Fletcher. I don't know what I would do without your help." "We'll get to the bottom of this," Jessica assured him. "Now show me the way." As they left the inn, Jessica couldn't shake the feeling that their search for answers would lead them down a dangerous path. The Cobblestone Estate held more than just history. It held a secret that someone was willing to kill to protect. Chapter 2. The Ghosts of Cobblestone Estate. The journey to Cobblestone Estate was brief, but as Jessica and Thomas approached the estate's wrought iron gates, the air grew thick with a sense of foreboding. The trees that lined the long driveway seemed to lean inward, casting deep shadows across the path. The mansion loomed in the distance, an imposing silhouette against the grey sky. Even in daylight, there was something unsettling about the estate, as if the past refused to let go. "Here we are," Thomas said softly, his voice filled with awe and unease. He stepped out of the car and led Jessica down the overgrown path. The estate had been abandoned for years, and nature had slowly begun to reclaim the land, twisting vines and ivy, creeping up the old stone walls of the house. Yet there was something strangely elegant about the mansion's dilapidated state, like a forgotten beauty waiting to be rediscovered. Jessica surveyed the grounds, her sharp eyes taking in every detail. The mansion had once been a grand estate built with wealth and pride, but time had taken its toll. The windows were cracked, the front door hanging slightly ajar. The place looked like it hadn't been inhabited in decades, yet there was an undeniable feeling that someone or something was still here. "Where exactly did you find the clues, Thomas?" Jessica asked as they walked toward the house. Thomas stopped near a small garden gate, turning to face her. "It was in the attic," he said. "The Vance family kept all sorts of things up there. Papers, old furniture, even some military uniforms from the war. But it was one of the journals I found that led me to the cellar. Evelyn Vance wrote about it in a letter to a friend, saying it was a place of great significance. But there was no map, no real directions." Jessica nodded thoughtfully. "And that's when you began searching the estate?" "Exactly," Thomas replied. "I started by examining the old cellar door, but it's locked. There are other doors in the house, but none of them lead to anything useful. I'm convinced that the cellar is where the secret is hidden. If only I could get inside." Jessica looked up at the mansion. Its eerie silence seemed to speak volumes. "We'll find a way in. But we need to be careful. Whoever is threatening you doesn't want this secret uncovered, and we may not be the only ones looking for it." Thomas shuddered at the thought, but nodded. Together they entered the house, stepping gingerly over the threshold. The inside of the mansion was just as abandoned as the outside, dusty, with cobwebs hanging from the ceilings. The floors creaked under their weight as they moved cautiously through the dark halls. The place smelled of old wood and must, the remnants of a once thriving home, now slowly decaying. Jessica could imagine the family gatherings, the laughter that must have echoed through the rooms in happier times. But now it was only the whisper of the past that remained. As they made their way through the large foyer, Thomas led Jessica toward the stairs. "The attic is just up here, but I'm warning you, Mrs. Fletcher, it's a mess up there. Piles of old papers, boxes. It's not easy to navigate." Jessica's eyes gleamed with determination. "I've dealt with worse," she said, with a wry smile. "Show me the way." The stairs creaked beneath their feet as they ascended, the air growing colder with each step. At the top, they were greeted by a long corridor, lined with dusty, forgotten furniture. Thomas led her down the hall to a door that seemed to be in a state of constant disrepair. He hesitated before pushing it open. Inside, the attic was just as Thomas had described, a chaotic jumble of old relics, papers, and broken furniture. A few large trunks sat in the corner, and shelves were stacked high with old books and boxes. The room had an oppressive atmosphere, like the weight of history itself was pressing down on them. Jessica walked into the room, carefully picking her way through the debris. Her eyes scanned the clutter, looking for anything that might provide a clue. She paused by a desk in the corner, where a pile of yellowed papers lay scattered across the surface. Thomas had already been through much of this, but there was something in the way the papers were arranged that caught Jessica's attention. "These weren't like this before," Jessica murmured. She turned to Thomas. "Have you gone through all of this?" "I did, but it was mostly useless," Thomas said, his tone defensive. "Most of it was just old correspondence, family history. Things that didn't mean much." Jessica reached down and picked up a letter from the pile. It was an old, faded envelope sealed with wax. Her fingers traced the intricate design on the seal before carefully breaking it open. Inside, she found a letter dated several months before Evelyn Vance's disappearance. Thomas leaned over her shoulder as she read aloud. "My dearest friend, I am writing to you in haste. My father is growing more paranoid by the day, convinced that there is something worth protecting on the estate. He speaks of a key to our future, hidden beneath the cobblestones of the cellar. But I fear that this is no ordinary treasure. It is something far darker, something he has kept from me for years." Jessica stopped reading and looked up at Thomas. This is what she meant, the key to their future. It wasn't just a treasure, it's something much more dangerous. Thomas nodded, his face pale. "I've found similar mentions in the journals, but I never thought—" He broke off, his voice trailing off as though he had just come to a terrifying realization. Jessica stood up, clutching the letter in her hand. "We're getting closer, Thomas. But the more we uncover, the more dangerous it becomes. Whoever is threatening you knows about this letter, and they won't stop until the secret is buried." Thomas swallowed hard. "What do we do now?" "We head for the cellar," Jessica said. "It's the only place that makes sense. But be ready for anything. I have a feeling we're not the only ones who know about this secret." With the letter in hand, Jessica led Thomas back downstairs, the air growing heavier with each step. As they reached the basement door, a sense of finality hung in the air. Something was waiting for them beyond that door. They weren't alone anymore. The door creaked open, and Jessica was the first to step inside. Chapter 3. Shadows in the Cellar. The basement stairs groaned beneath Jessica's feet as she descended with careful precision. The dim light barely reached the bottom, leaving pockets of darkness that seemed to swallow sound. Thomas stayed close behind her, his breath shallow and uneven. The cellar was colder than the rest of the mansion, as if it had been sealed off from life for too long. When they reached the bottom, Jessica swept her flashlight across the stone walls. Time had weathered them, leaving cracks like jagged scars. Dust particles drifted through the air as if disturbed by their presence alone. "This place hasn't been touched in decades," Jessica murmured. Thomas nodded but said nothing, too consumed by nervous anticipation. His eyes darted around the room, searching the shadows for unseen threats. Jessica moved forward, examining the stone floor. The cellar stretched wider than she expected, filled with old barrels, crates, and rusted tools, scattered haphazardly. Cobwebs hung from the low ceiling like forgotten lace. According to the letters, Evelyn mentioned a hidden area beneath the cobblestones, Jessica said, something her father protected fiercely. Thomas crouched beside a cluster of old crates and brushed aside layers of dirt. "I checked this corner before. Nothing unusual." Jessica stepped further into the cellar, letting her instincts guide her. Something about the room felt off. The air was too still, the silence too deliberate. She approached a section of floor near the back wall, noticing a slight dip in the stone pattern. "Thomas!" she called softly. He rushed to her side. "Did you find something?" "Possibly." Jessica knelt, brushing her hand across the uneven stones. "Look here. These tiles weren't laid at the same time as the rest." Thomas's eyes widened. "A trapdoor!" Jessica tapped one of the stones lightly. The hollow sound told her everything. "It's definitely covering something." Thomas's excitement overcame his fear. "We just need to remove it. I can get—" Before he could finish, a loud crash echoed through the cellar. Both froze. Jessica stood straight, her flashlight swinging toward the staircase. Something had toppled over upstairs. A chair? A loose shutter? Or someone? Thomas whispered. "Someone's here." Jessica raised a hand to silence him. She listened carefully. Another sound followed, soft, deliberate footsteps moving across the floor above them. This was no accident. "We need to stay quiet," Jessica whispered, "and we need to leave. Now!" "But the cellar, Thomas," she said firmly. "Whatever is beneath these stones isn't going anywhere, but whoever's upstairs might be." Thomas reluctantly nodded. Jessica led him toward the stairs, moving silently despite the creaking wood. Halfway up, the faint outline of movement flashed at the top of the staircase, too fast to identify, but unmistakable. Jessica stopped abruptly. "We can't go that way," she whispered. Thomas looked frantic. "Then how do we get out?" Jessica glanced back toward the cellar, scanning for another exit. Her beam landed on a small, boarded-up window near the ceiling. The glass was cracked and fogged, but it faced the garden outside. "That window?" Thomas followed her gaze. "It's too small." "Small enough to go unnoticed," Jessica countered, "and just big enough for us to fit through if we remove the boards." Thomas nodded, adrenaline pushing him forward. They moved quickly, prying at the loose boards with an old metal rod Jessica found leaning against a crate. The wood gave way with soft but urgent cracks. Above them the footsteps grew louder. Jessica froze again, listening. Then the cellar door slammed shut. Both flinched. "That confirms it," she whispered. "Someone followed us." Thomas, trembling, pushed at the last board. It snapped free, revealing an opening to the outside. Jessica helped him climb up first, giving him a boost until he squeezed through the tight frame. He reached down to help pull Jessica out next. They spilled onto the grass behind the mansion, breathless and shaken. The estate loomed behind them, silent and menacing. "Whoever it was," Thomas panted, "they knew exactly where we were." Jessica dusted off her hands. "Which means they've been watching you for longer than you realized." Thomas swallowed hard. "What do we do now?" "We regroup," Jessica said firmly, "and we analyze what we found. You were right about the hidden cellar. That hollow floor is exactly where Evelyn Vance's secret lies." "But someone else knows too." "Yes," Jessica agreed. "And they're willing to scare us off. Or worse." Jessica gestured toward the car. "Let's get back to the inn. We need to figure out who benefits from keeping that secret buried." Thomas followed her, still glancing back at the mansion every few steps. "Do you think the Vance secret is worth killing over?" Jessica didn't answer immediately. Her thoughts raced through the possibilities. Money, documents, a crime buried by history. She had solved dozens of murders, each driven by motives as old as time: greed, fear, revenge. But there was something uniquely unsettling about this case, something that gnawed at her instincts. "Whatever's hidden beneath those stones," she finally said. "Someone in the present believes it threatens them, and that tells me it's something powerful." Thomas nodded solemnly. As they reached the car, Jessica paused. Her sharp eyes caught movement near the tree line. A dark figure stood partially concealed behind a thicket, watching them. She could make out nothing more than a silhouette, but the presence was undeniable. "Thomas," she whispered, "get in the car, quietly." He followed her gaze, stiffened, and obeyed. Jessica waited a moment longer, locking eyes with the figure, or at least where she believed the eyes must be. Then, without warning, the silhouette slipped away into the trees, vanishing as silently as it had appeared. Jessica climbed into the driver's seat. "This is no longer just about history," she said as she started the engine. "This is about survival." The car pulled away from the estate, leaving behind the shadows that had begun to stir. Chapter 4. The Man in the Photograph. Back at the Cabot Cove Inn, Jessica and Thomas settled into a quiet corner of the lobby. The morning sun filtered through the large windows, casting warm lines of light across the floor. For the first time since entering Cobblestone Estate, Thomas seemed to breathe easier, though his hands still trembled slightly as he wrapped them around a cup of coffee. Jessica, on the other hand, was already in analysis mode. She had pulled out a notebook from her bag, jotted down key observations, and sketched rough layouts of the cellar. "The person who trapped us in the cellar knew the estate well," Jessica began. "They also knew where you'd be searching." Thomas looked pale. "You think it's someone local?" "It's possible," Jessica said. "Cabot Cove is small. Word travels quickly. Someone must have noticed you visiting the estate repeatedly." Thomas leaned back, thinking. "I kept a low profile. I didn't talk to anyone. I didn't tell anyone what I found." Jessica shook her head lightly. "You underestimate how observant people can be, even unintentionally." As she spoke, one of the inn's staff members approached with a small folder. "Mrs. Fletcher, someone left this for you at the front desk." Jessica accepted it with polite thanks, though a flicker of caution tightened her expression. The envelope was plain, sealed, and unmarked. No name, no handwriting, nothing to indicate its source. Thomas tensed. "Is it a threat?" "Let's see," Jessica said, sliding a finger under the flap. Inside there was a single photograph, an old sepia-toned image. At first glance it resembled a family portrait taken many decades ago. But as Jessica studied it more closely, her posture stiffened. The photograph showed the Vance family standing outside Cobblestone Estate. The father, stern-faced, stood front and center. Beside him was his wife, her arm resting gently on his sleeve. Two children, Evelyn and a younger boy, stood in front of them. But it wasn't the Vances who alarmed her. In the far right corner, almost cropped out of the frame, stood a shadowy figure. His features were partially obscured, but Jessica could make out a tall silhouette with broad shoulders, and even though the photo was old, the man's posture was watchful, almost predatory. "What is that?" Thomas whispered. Jessica turned the photo over. On the back, written in faded ink, were the words, "He never left." Thomas swallowed. "What does that mean?" Jessica tapped the photo lightly. "It means someone wants us to believe that the threat we're facing didn't begin with you. And it didn't begin recently." Thomas rubbed his forehead. "He never left. Does that imply one of the Vances remained? But the entire family disappeared. Or, Jessica suggested, someone connected to them stayed behind." A sudden knock on the table made them both jump. Sheriff Mort Metzger stood beside them, looking curious and mildly annoyed. "Jessica," he said, adjusting his glasses, "mind explaining why I got a call saying you and this gentleman were seen trespassing at Cobblestone Estate?" Jessica answered calmly. "Mort, we weren't trespassing. The estate hasn't had an owner in decades. We were investigating something important." Mort raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Important, like your usual mysteries?" "Yes," Jessica replied. Mort sighed. "All right, but next time give me a heads up before you go exploring abandoned property." "And who's this?" He nodded toward Thomas. Thomas introduced himself nervously, explaining his research and the threats he'd received. Mort listened carefully, his expression shifting from irritation to concern. "Threats, huh? Why didn't you report them to me?" "I thought they were pranks," Thomas admitted. "I didn't think anyone would actually follow me." Mort crossed his arms. "Well, they did. And if someone locked you two in a cellar, that's attempted harm, not a joke." Jessica handed him the photograph. "This was left for me anonymously." Mort studied it, squinting. "Creepy. What's this writing supposed to mean?" "We're trying to figure that out," Jessica said. Mort frowned. "I'll run this through our system. Maybe someone recognizes the handwriting or the photo." Jessica doubted the Cabot Cove Sheriff's Office had the tools for analyzing century-old ink, but Mort's involvement was better than nothing. Before leaving, Mort added, "Be careful, both of you. Cabot Cove may be peaceful most days, but this kind of business attracts trouble. When he walked away, Thomas exhaled shakily. What if whoever sent that photo is the same person watching us at the estate? Very likely, Jessica said, and they're escalating. Jessica studied the photograph again, focusing on the shadowy man. Something about his presence felt wrong, not like a member of the Vance family, but like an outsider whose purpose was secretive. Thomas, Jessica said slowly, you mentioned that the Vance family was rumored to be involved in illicit activities during the Civil War. Did any of the documents suggest who their partners or enemies might have been? Thomas thought for a moment. There were vague mentions, supply exchanges, a few coded entries in journals, but nothing explicitly naming individuals. Then that's where we need to look next, Jessica said. There's always a paper trail when something valuable is at stake, especially if someone would kill to protect it. Thomas's eyes flickered with determination. I can take you to the archives. There are records at the Cabot Cove Historical Society. Some documents are fragile, but I've spent months organizing them. Jessica smiled slightly. Then let's go. The answer may be buried in those archives. They left the inn shortly after, the old photograph tucked safely in Jessica's bag. As they walked toward Thomas's car, the town seemed its usual peaceful self, but Jessica sensed the undercurrent shifting. Someone was watching. Someone who didn't want the secrets of Cobblestone Estate revealed. As they drove off, a man wearing a dark jacket stepped out from behind a lamppost. His gaze followed them with chilling stillness. He raised a cell phone to his ear. They're heading to the archives, he said in a low voice. We can't let them find it. He ended the call abruptly, slipped back into the alley, and disappeared. Chapter 5. Secrets in the Archives. The Cabot Cove. Historical Society was housed in a modest brick building tucked between the town library and an old bakery. A brass plaque above the door read, "Preserving Our Past for a Better Tomorrow." Jessica had visited the archives many times over the years, but never with stakes quite like this. Thomas unlocked the side door with a key he'd been given as a volunteer researcher. I'm the only one who's been working with the Vance collection, he explained nervously. Most of it was donated decades ago, after the estate went into abandonment. The moment the door closed behind them, the air inside felt thick with the smell of old paper, ink, and wood polish. Rows of shelves stretched across the room, stacked with leather-bound ledgers, boxes of letters, faded maps, and brittle documents. The lights flickered on, casting long shadows across the aisles. Jessica scanned the room carefully. Is anyone else supposed to be here today? Thomas shook his head. No, but that doesn't mean someone isn't here. She nodded. After being trapped in the estate cellar and followed by a mysterious figure, caution was no longer optional. Thomas led her toward the back of the archives where a long oak table was covered with papers. This is where I've been cataloguing everything related to the Vance family, he said. There are journals, land records, letters, and a few items that never made sense. Jessica approached the table, her eyes narrowing at 3 old ledgers stacked neatly in the center. Their covers were worn, their bindings cracked. She opened the top ledger, revealing pages filled with precise handwriting, lists, dates, transactions. What were they trading? Jessica asked. Thomas hesitated. Not food, not textiles, something coded. Every entry from 1863 onward is encrypted. I spent weeks trying to decipher it. Jessica leaned in closer. The columns contained symbols instead of words, circles, triangles, slashes, dots, a cipher of some kind. Have you cracked any of this? She asked. Just a few linings. Thomas pulled out a notebook and flipped to a page filled with annotations. Some symbols repeat next to logbook entries labeled dusk deliveries. I think they refer to shipments. Shipments of what? Jessica pressed. Thomas lowered his voice. I believe the Vances were secretly transporting something valuable during the Civil War, something that required a hidden cellar. Jessica traced a fingertip over the symbols, her intuition sparking. Something worth killing for, even now. Before Thomas could respond, the door at the front of the archives clicked. Jessica stiffened. Someone had entered, quietly. Thomas whispered, "No one else should have a key." Jessica motioned for him to stay silent. She moved down the aisle, back pressed against the shelves, listening for movement. Soft footsteps echoed through the building, slow, deliberate, as if the person was trying to conceal their presence. The footsteps stopped. Jessica waited, every nerve alert. She peeked carefully around the corner, but saw nothing. The room was still, too still, as though holding its breath. Then Thomas shouted from behind her, "Jessica, look!" She spun around. Thomas stood holding a small envelope he'd found on the table. It hadn't been there moments earlier. Someone had slipped it in while they were distracted. Jessica hurried back to him. Thomas handed her the envelope, his voice shaking. "How did they get this on the table without us seeing?" Jessica didn't answer. She tore the envelope open carefully and removed a single index card. Written in bold black ink were the words, "Stop searching, or you won't leave the archives." No signature, no handwriting flourish, just a stark warning. Thomas backed away. "They're here, somewhere in this building." Jessica scanned the shadows again. The room was silent except for the soft hum of old fluorescent lights. "We need to leave," Thomas whispered. "Not yet," Jessica replied calmly. "This person wants to scare us. That means we're close to uncovering something important." She returned to the table and reached for the bottom ledger. Unlike the others, this one was heavier, bound with a leather strap. As she opened it, a folded sheet slipped from between the pages. Jessica unfolded it carefully. It was a map. An old, hand-drawn map of Cobblestone Estate. The house, the gardens, the stables. But there was an extra structure drawn in faint ink, one not visible in the current ruins. "What is that?" Thomas breathed. "A second cellar," Jessica said, her voice low, steady. "Hidden under the east grounds." Thomas stared at the map, stunned. "I never saw anything there. It looked like open land." "That's the point," Jessica replied. "If someone wanted to hide something permanently, they'd bury the entrance and mark it only in private documents." "But then who's going after us?" Thomas whispered. "A descendant? Someone who already found the cellar? Someone who benefits if the secret remains buried?" Jessica folded the map and tucked it into her jacket. "Whoever they are, they're watching us closely." Before Thomas could respond, a loud thud echoed down the aisle. Jessica whipped her flashlight toward the sound. A document box had fallen off a shelf, but the shelf was far too high for it to have fallen accidentally. Someone had knocked it down. She quickly scanned the aisle. The faint shadow of a person slipped between shelves. Jessica stepped back, whispering, "Thomas, we need to go now." He didn't argue. They hurried toward the back exit. As they reached the door, Jessica glanced over her shoulder one last time. The shadowy figure stood at the end of the aisle, motionless, watching. Jessica couldn't see their face, only their silhouette, but she recognized the stance. The same broad shoulders she'd seen in the photograph from the Vance family portrait. The same outline as the man who stood near the estate. He was real, alive, and following them. Jessica grabbed Thomas's arm. "Run!" They burst out the back door into the bright afternoon sunlight, hearts pounding. Jessica didn't stop until they reached the car. As Thomas fumbled with the keys, Jessica looked back at the archive windows. No silhouette appeared, no movement. But she knew he was still inside. waiting and watching. Chapter 6. The Second Cellar. Thomas drove with trembling hands, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. The car wound through the quiet streets of Cabot Cove, but neither he nor Jessica dared to speak. The shadowy figure in the archives, the same figure from the estate in the photograph, no longer felt like a ghost from history. He was real, very real, and he was hunting them. Only when they reached a small overlook outside of town did Jessica finally break the silence. "Stop here!" Thomas pulled over. The car engine hummed softly, the only sound between them. Jessica unfolded the map she had taken from the ledger, laying it across her lap. The faint lines, though old, were unmistakable. Cobblestone Estate, detailed with structures long gone. And there, drawn in faded ink, the second cellar. Thomas leaned over. "I can't believe I missed it. I walked those grounds dozens of times." "It was meant to be missed," Jessica said. Hidden beneath open land, no markers left on the surface. The only trace was in the private ledger. She tapped the map. "This cellar holds the real secret. Whoever is following us knows that too." Thomas swallowed. "Do you think the man in the photograph is a descendant of the Vance family?" Jessica considered the question. "Possibly, but descendants don't usually resort to threats and stalking. This feels more urgent, as if he wants to protect something. Or hide something," Thomas added. Jessica nodded. "Exactly." She folded the map and looked at Thomas steadily. "We need to return to the estate." Thomas recoiled. "Jessica, he was there, in the trees, watching us." "And he'll keep watching," Jessica said calmly. "But the longer we wait, the more time he has to destroy whatever evidence is left. If he suspects we found the map, he might already be heading there." Thomas stared ahead, wrestling with fear and determination. Finally, he nodded. "All right, but we need to approach carefully." Jessica gave him an encouraging smile. "Careful is my specialty." The drive back to the estate was tense. Thick clouds gathered along the horizon, darkening the sky. A storm was coming fast. As they turned onto the overgrown path leading to Cobblestone Estate, the first drops of rain tapped against the windshield. "It's going to pour," Thomas murmured. "Storms can be useful," Jessica replied. "Footsteps get washed away." He didn't ask whether she meant theirs or the stalkers. The estate appeared ahead, as imposing as ever. The mansion loomed against the grey sky, its broken windows like hollow eyes watching their approach. Jessica studied the grounds carefully, scanning for movement. Nothing. The figure was either hiding or gone. "Park behind the stables," Jessica instructed. "We'll move on foot." Thomas pulled the car into the shelter of the old stable walls. Rain intensified, creating a steady drumming sound. Jessica stepped out, pulling her jacket tight, and motioned for Thomas to follow. She unfolded the map again, shielding it from the rain. "The second cellar is located east of the mansion, this way." They moved through tall, wet grass as thunder rumbled overhead. The storm's winds tugged at branches, making them sway wildly. Jessica kept her flashlight in hand, though daylight still lingered. After several minutes of searching, they reached a clearing, flat, barren earth stretched before them, free of trees or debris. It didn't look like much, but Jessica recognized the positioning from the map. "This is it," Jessica said. "The cellar should be beneath us." Thomas looked around, confused. "But there's nothing here." "No structure, no door, nothing." Jessica knelt and brushed away the wet grass. Her fingers traced a faint line in the soil, a rectangular outline of stone, barely visible under decades of dirt. "Look closer," she said. Thomas dropped beside her. "A foundation stone," he breathed. "This used to be a building." Yes, Jessica said. Something was demolished here long ago, but the entrance might still exist. She stood and began tapping her foot lightly across different sections of the stone outline. After a few taps, a hollow sound echoed beneath her shoe. Thomas's eyes widened. There! They quickly cleared away the soil and debris. Minutes later, they uncovered a large metal ring embedded in a heavy wooden door, rotted but intact. "A hatch," Thomas whispered. "Jessica, this is incredible." Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the clearing in a brilliant white glow. For a brief second, everything was visible. The hatch, the ruins, and the shadowy silhouette standing behind a cluster of trees. Jessica froze. Thomas followed her stare and gasped. "He's here!" The figure didn't move, didn't run. He simply watched. "Thomas!" Jessica whispered, keeping her voice steady. "We open the hatch. Now!" "But he'll follow us," Thomas said. "He'll follow us no matter what," Jessica replied. "But if we get inside, we may be able to lock him out." With trembling hands, Thomas pulled the metal ring. The wooden hatch groaned as it lifted, revealing a dark set of steps leading underground. A burst of cold air rushed up from the opening, carrying the scent of earth and old secrets. Jessica lifted her flashlight and shined it into the darkness. "I'll go first." Thomas hesitated but nodded. Before descending, Jessica looked back toward the tree line. The figure was gone. A gust of wind rustled the branches, but no trace of him remained. "We don't have much time," she said. "Inside." They climbed down into the darkness, closing the hatch behind them. The sound of rain faded, replaced by the muffled silence of underground stone. Jessica's flashlight revealed a long tunnel leading deeper into the earth. The walls were lined with old beams, some cracked with age. "This wasn't just a cellar," Jessica whispered. "It was a bunker." Thomas stared in amazement. "Why would a wealthy family build something like this?" Jessica stepped forward, her light illuminating a rusted metal door at the end of the corridor. "We're about to find out," she said. As they reached the door, Jessica pushed it slowly open. Inside the chamber, they saw something that stopped them in their tracks. A table, a lantern, stacks of documents, and on the wall, photographs, notes and maps pinned in careful order. Thomas's voice trembled. "Jessica, this isn't old. This has been used recently." Jessica's blood ran cold. Someone had been researching the Vance secret long before Thomas. And they were still here. Chapter 7. The Man Behind the Wall of Secrets. The underground chamber was nothing like Jessica expected. It wasn't dusty or forgotten like the cellar beneath the mansion. It was alive, active. Someone had been here recently, maybe even hours ago. The walls were lined with photos, documents, sketches, and faded newspaper clippings, all pinned with meticulous precision. It looked less like a historical archive and more like the headquarters of someone obsessively tracking a long-buried secret. Thomas stepped forward, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Jessica, this is someone's hideout." Jessica nodded slowly. "And not just anyone. Someone who's been investigating the Vance family long before you arrived." She moved her flashlight across the wall. The clippings showed headlines dating back more than 30 years. Mysterious disappearance at Cabot Cove, Vance descendant claims family fortune, unmarked graves discovered near estate. On a separate board, several pages were connected with red string. Evelyn Vance, her father, a coded ledger, shipments during the Civil War, and a name repeated several times. Samuel Wren. Jessica felt her pulse quicken. "Thomas," she said softly. "Have you ever come across this name?" He shook his head. "Never." "Who is he?" Jessica removed a photograph pinned in the center of the board. It showed a stern-faced man in his late 40s, wearing a suit. The photo looked decades old, but unmistakably clear. Samuel Wren, Jessica murmured, was a smuggler. During the Civil War, he was known for trafficking forbidden goods across state lines: gold, documents, stolen weapons. He disappeared in 1864, the same year the Vance family vanished. Thomas stared in disbelief. "You're saying the Vances worked with him?" Jessica pointed to a faded contract beneath the photo. "It appears so. Look here, Evelyn's father signed these documents. They weren't trading food or supplies. They were hiding something for Samuel Wren." Thunder boomed overhead, shaking the underground beams. Thomas rubbed his forehead, overwhelmed. "So the Vances disappeared because of him?" "Or with him?" Jessica added. "This could explain why someone is threatening us today. If Wren's legacy or treasure still exists, someone might see it as theirs." Thomas stepped back, staring at the wall. "Then the man following us? Well, maybe a descendant," Jessica finished, "or someone obsessed with continuing Wren's work." Jessica moved to another table in the room. On it lay scattered papers, modern ones, recent surveillance photos of the estate, blurry pictures of Thomas entering the archives, even one of Jessica leaving her home earlier that morning. Thomas's breath hitched. "Oh God, he's been watching us for days." Jessica found a notebook beneath the photos, the last pages filled with frantic handwriting. "They're getting too close. The maps reveal too much. The key must remain hidden at all costs. No one must uncover the truth of the Vance debt." Jessica exhaled sharply. "This man isn't just protecting the secret. He's guarding an unresolved vendetta." Before Thomas could respond, a sound echoed from the tunnel behind them. Footsteps, slow, deliberate. Jessica's heart pounded. "Hide the light!" Thomas quickly switched off the flashlight. Darkness swallowed them save for the faint glow of a lantern still burning on the table. Jessica grabbed Thomas's arm and pulled him behind a large crate. They crouched there, breathless. The metal door at the entrance creaked open. A silhouette appeared in the doorway. Broad shoulders, tall, unmoving. The same silhouette from the photograph. From the estate, from the archives. He stepped inside, lantern in hand. Jessica held her breath. The man moved with the confidence of someone who knew every inch of this room. He walked straight to the wall of clippings, running a hand along the documents as if checking for any disturbance. Jessica whispered so softly, Thomas barely heard her. "He's verifying if we touched anything." The stranger paused suddenly. Jessica felt her heartbeat stop. He picked up the crumpled envelope Jessica had dropped earlier, the warning note, and examined it slowly. His head tilted, and an unsettling quiet filled the room. Then he spoke for the first time. His voice was deep, roughened by years of silence. "They've come further than I expected." He placed the note down with eerie calm. "And now," he continued, "they'll have to be dealt with." Thomas's breath hitched, shaky and terrified. Jessica tightened her grip on his arm, silently urging him not to move, not to make a sound. The stranger turned toward the old desk and picked up a rusted key. He slipped it into his coat pocket. The key to their future. Evelyn Vance's words echoed in Jessica's mind like a strike of lightning. This was it. The key wasn't a metaphor, it was real. The stranger started toward the door again. Jessica whispered, "Thomas, be ready to run." But as the man reached the doorway, he paused. He turned his head slightly as though sensing a shift in the air. Jessica froze. Had he seen the movement of her breath, the shadow of her shoe? Seconds dragged like hours. Finally, after a tense moment, The man stepped into the tunnel, his footsteps fading into the distance. Jessica waited several seconds longer before whispering, "Now." Thomas exhaled loudly, nearly collapsing from shock. "Jessica, he was right there, right there." "I know," Jessica said calmly, though her pulse was racing. "But we're not done here." She stood, returning to the desk. Her eyes studied the empty space where the key had been. "He took it with him," Thomas said shakily. "What now?" Jessica tore a sheet from the notebook on the table, careful not to disturb the rest of the documents. "Now," she said, "we follow him." Thomas looked horrified. "Follow him? Jessica, he's dangerous. He's been watching us. He's threatening us." Jessica met his fear with calm determination. "And he has the only object the Vances tried to protect. Whatever that key unlocks, whatever secret destroyed their family, is now in his hands." She folded the map and tucked it into her jacket. "We can't let him disappear again." Thomas swallowed, nodding slowly as his courage returned. Jessica lifted the lantern, casting light along the underground corridor. "One thing is certain," she said. "The truth is no longer hidden in the shadows, and neither is he." They stepped into the tunnel, following the faint echoes of footsteps that had already vanished, but left a trail Jessica was determined to uncover. Chapter 8. The Final Key. The tunnel twisted deeper underground, the air growing colder with each step Jessica and Thomas took. The lantern's glow flickered wildly, casting long, uneasy shadows on the stone walls. Jessica moved cautiously, following the faint scuff marks left by the man ahead of them. He wasn't far, his footprints were fresh, still pressed sharply into the dust. Thomas whispered, "Do you think he knows we're following?" Jessica kept her voice low. "Not yet, but he will soon." A rumble of thunder rolled through the ground above, shaking tiny pebbles loose from the ceiling. The storm had reached the estate. The tunnel finally opened into a larger chamber, a circular room with a domed ceiling braced by old wooden beams. At the far end stood an iron door, its surface rusted, its lock ancient, and in front of it stood the man. He wasn't hiding now. His tall frame was illuminated fully by the lantern he'd hung beside the door. His coat was soaked from the storm, his boots muddy, his shoulders squared like someone prepared for confrontation. Jessica and Thomas froze. The man turned slowly toward them. His expression was unreadable, neither anger nor surprise, but something far more unsettling: acceptance. "I knew you wouldn't stop," he said. His voice echoed through the chamber. "Jessica Fletcher, you're as persistent as they say." Jessica stepped forward slightly, her tone steady. "You've been tracking this secret for a long time. Who are you, really?" The man stared at her for a long moment, then lifted his chin. "My name is Arthur Wren." Thomas inhaled sharply. "Wren, as in Samuel Wren?" Arthur nodded. "My great-grandfather." Jessica felt the pieces click into place. "So the disappearance of the Vance family, the hidden cellar, the threats, all of it ties back to your family legacy." Arthur's jaw tightened. "For generations we've been blamed for what happened. Stories twisted, reputations destroyed. Samuel Wren wasn't a criminal, he was betrayed." Jessica studied him closely. "You believe the Vances stole something from him?" "Not believe," Arthur snapped. "I know." He gestured to the iron door. "Behind this lies the proof, what my family has sought for over a century, and the Vances hid it to save themselves." Thomas's voice trembled. "So you stalked me, sent threats, locked us in a cellar? Why?" Arthur's eyes flashed. "Because you were getting close to uncovering things you didn't understand. My warnings were meant to scare you away, not harm you." Jessica's gaze hardened. "Then what about locking us inside the archives? That wasn't a warning." Arthur hesitated, guilt flickering in his expression. "That wasn't me." Jessica froze. "What?" Arthur shook his head. "Someone else was there, someone following you as well." A chill crawled down Jessica's spine. Another person? Another threat? Before she could question him further, Arthur unlocked the iron door using the ancient key he'd taken from the chamber earlier. Metal groaned as the door swung open. Inside was a small, vault-like room. Jessica entered first, Thomas behind her. And there, sitting on a stone pedestal in the center of the vault, was a wooden chest bound with iron straps. Arthur stepped in after them. Samuel Wren entrusted the Vances with something vital. They were supposed to keep it safe during the war, but greed overcame loyalty. Jessica approached the chest and carefully lifted the lid. Inside was a ledger, just a ledger, nothing golden, nothing jeweled. A single thick book wrapped in cloth. Thomas blinked. "That's it, a ledger." Arthur nodded. The truth. Evidence of corrupt officials, stolen funds, wartime crimes covered by government officers. Samuel Wren tried to expose them. The Vances feared retaliation, so they hid it, then vanished. Jessica lifted the ledger gently. This could have changed history. "It still can," Arthur said with quiet conviction. But before Jessica could examine it further, a sudden metallic click echoed behind them. Jessica and Thomas spun around. A man stood at the entrance to the vault, holding a revolver, a man neither of them had ever seen before. He was older, dressed in weather-worn clothes, his face lined with bitterness and fury. "Put the book down," the stranger growled. Arthur's eyes widened. "Uncle Damien?" Jessica's mind raced. A second Wren, the one Arthur didn't know, was following them. Damien Wren stepped into the vault, gun raised, eyes blazing. "You were supposed to walk away, Arthur, but you couldn't resist playing the hero." Arthur stepped forward. "Uncle, listen." "Quiet," Damien snapped. "That ledger will ruin everything. The past is dead. Let it stay buried." Jessica spoke calmly. "You followed us. You left threats. You tried to keep the truth hidden the same way your ancestors did." Damien's lip curled. "Truth gets people killed. Samuel learned that. The Vances learned that. And now—" He pointed the gun directly at Jessica. Thomas gasped. "No, please." Jessica remained perfectly still. Damien's hand trembled, but his aim stayed steady. Then Arthur moved. He threw himself at Damien with a desperate shout. The gun fired, the shot exploding through the vault in a deafening roar. Thomas ducked, Jessica flinched, and Arthur wrestled his uncle to the ground. The gun skidded across the floor. Jessica grabbed it instantly and kicked it out of reach. Damien tried to lunge for her, but Arthur held him down, shouting, "It's over! It ends here!" Damien thrashed wildly, but eventually collapsed, exhausted. Jessica called Sheriff Mort immediately. Hours later, as Mort escorted Damien Wren into custody, the storm finally passed, leaving Cobblestone Estate drenched but quiet. Arthur stood beside Jessica, watching in silence. "He would have killed us all," Thomas said quietly. Arthur nodded heavily. "My family was cursed by secrets and fear. Damien believed protecting the past was more important than justice." Jessica placed a hand on Arthur's shoulder. "You chose differently. That matters." Arthur closed his eyes briefly. "What happens now?" Jessica looked at the old ledger in her hands. "Now, the truth finally comes to light." Thomas exhaled, relief washing over him. "And the Vances?" Jessica looked back at the estate, its windows reflecting the clearing sky. Their story too will finally be told. As they walked away from the estate, Jessica felt the weight of centuries lifting. Secrets buried beneath cobblestones, a family torn apart by betrayal, a mystery solved at last. And behind them, the storm clouds drifted away, leaving Cabot Cove peaceful once more.